There's this biography that was written, an autobiography written by Shimon Peres, and it came out after his death. I understand he had finished writing it before he died, but I had an experience like that myself. I knew a person, he was a religious scholar, a holy man. He was my pastor for a while. He had an intent in his life to write a book about the sacred partnership between Mary of Magdala and the Christed one known as Jesus. Right before he was set to proof the final edits on that book, presumably he was made sick. He developed a brain tumor that degenerated very quickly and killed him. I contend he was murdered. He was murdered with directed energy weapons. And these directed energy weapons have been used to murder other people. And not just murder them, but murder them in a way that subjects them to a particular kind of neurological trauma in order to rape their mind before they die. That's especially someone like that man who had a high level of knowledge, including sacred knowledge, who had devoted his entire life to this sacred knowledge, had a ministry, modest but sincere, and had also gone in a novel course of baptizing women in his ministry, including in a special ceremony he'd come up with himself, if someone wanted to tax his mind before they murdered him. Finally, they engaged this process of neurodegeneration so that they could run all kinds of scenarios and do everything they could to harvest and abstract as much as they could before he ended up actually dying. So it's different when somebody is subjected to directed energy weapons targeting their heart and targeting their mind. He was one of the ones that was targeted in his mind. And not just him. He had another pastor who was a colleague of his who had the same thing happen. He was in convalescence for a considerable amount of time after allegedly obtaining some sort of brain tumor. And I contend he was murdered in a similar manner between 2010 and 2011. Now, I can't say exactly what it was that murdered Shimon Peres. It was something similar. They intended for him to die immediately. He did not. And the question is, did he finish compiling his final autobiography, or, like in the situation involving John Beverly Butcher, which Shimon Peres put in a situation where he had completed the text, including in a certain manner, but when it came to the final edits, including potentially approving the table of contents, the specific headlines, titles of chapters, maybe the quotations, but especially the pictures, the photos that would be used in the book to accompany the manner in which he presented the story, the placement of the photos on the actual page. I don't believe he did. I do not believe that Shimon Peres actually had a chance to see what was supposed to be the final printed version of his last autobiography. And I believe that opportunists at the publisher gave priority to the presentation of that story to other people, including people that I do not believe Shimon Peres would have been in agreement with. There's information, if one knows how to look, in the final autobiography of Shimon Peres. He starts the story in a particular manner that I'm sure certain people, especially now, as a long-term political agenda has been unrolled, would probably find to be to their liking, perhaps more than he would, if he knew at the time what their intent was. He begins his biography, his final autobiography, talking about his time as a young man being educated on a kibbutz. Now, I've not read other autobiographies of him. I have read some biographies and autobiographies of other persons who grew up on kibbutzim, including in Israel, but also in other places. There's something very specific, however, that changes the story when one compares the presentation of information with the placement of the photos that were allowed to represent the story. There's a photo in there of a world leader. It doesn't seem to make sense in a direct, linear context, unless one sees that on the facing page is a discontinuity between the actual presentation of information in the picture and the caption. But more than that kind of ethnic swap, there's a picture. It's very similar to something that was ongoing in Texas at the time and has developed more prominence since. There's a case in Texas. It's often cited when it comes to considerations of public information law. It is part of a trend, one of two trends I contend to run concurrently, and are used to broker a form of kickback scheme that is a part of a kind of automation set up specifically through the civil administration of the state of Texas, including within various municipalities, and including and especially in consideration of anything intersecting with the judicial branch of government or law enforcement. There's two major trends. One of those has to do with whistleblowers for ISDs, people that are actually educators or involved in some manner, way, shape, or form with the primary education system, which would necessitate a consideration of the permanent school fund and bonds for the permanent school fund, and a case involving Boeing regarding privacy, or rather proprietary information connected to a project based out of San Antonio. It's a very specific location that is referenced. You should find the case. You should look at the map. Right across from the Barbara Bush Memorial Library in Houston, Texas, is the offices of Deloitte. See, under the terms of the Basel Convention that went into effect in July of 2019, I'm not the one that should be disclosing. That means names. That means dates. That means authorizations. That means financial institutions. That means shareholders. That means brokers. You're late. If I am not incorrect, you are now 2 years late. I think you have less than a week before you actually hit the formal deadline, wherein you are more than 2 years late. Every one of you.